Hi, my name is Lucky Angelo Vengua, and I will be presenting a paper that will be talking about the recent field of study that is called gamification. Gamifying education. What is known, what is believed, and what remains uncertain, a critical review, was conducted by Christo Deshev and Darina Desheva for the International Journal of Educational Technology in Higher Education and was published February 2017. The goal of this study is to study the effects of gamification on motivation and participation in education and its students. So, what exactly is gamification? Gamification was known as other terms before the term was coined back in 2010. It was called productivity games, surveillance entertainment, funware, playful design, behavioral games, and game layer, to name a few. But for the purposes of the study, Deshev and Desheva used the term that was used by Dieterding, Dixon, Khalid, and Knack in 2011, which is the use of game design elements in non-game contexts. For the research questions, the first question is what subjects are gamified and what activities are targeted? That focuses on what areas of the study is gamification used on. For question number two, what combinations of game elements are studied? This is about what were used to gamify the existing learning materials or courses. Question number three, how conclusive are the reported results regarding gamification targeting? Does gamification work? For the purposes of the study, the researchers used the Gartner hype cycle as a comparison model to observe the trends and expectations they observe. The methodology outlines a technology viability for commercial success, which points out the initial climb of emerging technology, reaching the peak of inflated expectations, followed by the subsequent throw of disillusionment before reaching the slope of enlightenment, where thorough understanding of technology takes place, then eventually the plateau of productivity where it normalizes. For question number one, what subjects are gamified and what activities are targeted? The research conducted a systemic mapping of empirical studies between June 2014 and December 2015, with the goal of recognizing emerging trends regarding gamification. They filtered out the research using full-fledged games, purely descriptive papers, and empirical papers with no findings. The research yielded 51 empirical research papers that matched their criteria and was reviewed for the study. This table shows that what subjects are gamified with computer studies or information technology taking the bulk of distribution with 20. It was pointed out that computer studies are the easiest adopters of gamification because of the curriculum is more flexible and the educators have the capacity and the means to implement these changes unlike their counterparts. This table shows the distribution of papers based on learning activities, with course-driven or class online learning discussions being the most gamified activity, followed by interaction with learning environment. This is in line with the trend or mindset that gamification, much like a game, motivates the students to participate and engage even more. Oddly enough, the tests amount only to 8% of the studies conducted, which could have supported the claims of gamification increases the capacity for learning and has better outcomes compared to non-gamified courses. Game elements, as discussed earlier in the chosen definition, are subdivided into three categories. Dynamics, which refers to or covers the aspects of constraints, emotions, narrative, progression, relationships. Mechanics are the set of rules that dictate the outcome of interactions and what makes the action move forward. And lastly, components, which covers what are not within the scope of dynamics and mechanisms like leaderboards, levels, point system, and content unlocking. For the purposes of this slide, game elements is the component category discussed in the previous slide. This table shows how many elements are used on the studies reviewed, with 3 or more elements used taking the majority with 31% on both. The most common gaming elements used for the studies are badges, points, and leaderboards, which are the examples you will usually see when gamification is talked about. But with this in mind, non-gamified curriculums already take elements and implement it. Badges in the form of honors and awards, points in the form of grades, and leaderboards in the form of dean's lists and honor rolls, which raised the question, why would gamification lead to improved motivation and outcomes when the elements stated are already there? Which brings us to the next research question. Are the reported results conclusive? To assess this information, the research papers were studied using the following factors: sample size, number of study groups and the length of the study, data collection, controlled variables, how the data was analyzed, and how well the conclusions are supported by the data. According to the nature of the empirical study, the papers were partitioned into two major categories: ABC studies, which target affective, behavioral, cognitive outcomes, and non-ABC studies. The researchers taken into consideration ABC studies, which composed 79% or 41 out of the 51 studies as a variable for this question. ABC studies yielded 12 positive, 3 negative, and 25 inconclusive results. The data shows that there is a disconnect to the popular claims that the gamification improves motivation and learning, as the inconclusive reports provide representation that the existing understanding on how gamification works and what aspects of it affects learning and motivation the most. Also, the research that show positive results correlates improved learning outcomes with motivation, which we know that there are factors that contribute to motivation which are intrinsic and extrinsic and does not necessarily affect learning outcomes, and outcomes doesn't really translate or indicate motivation. We now arrive to the conclusion. The gamified subjects are quite limited, and limitations often fall under the scope of capacity. The capacity of the material to be gamified, and the capacity of the educator to implement the changes. Existing gamification elements used are quite limited and to some extent already used in the standard curriculum, which is easier to implement as it is the current norm and for some time now. In some research, it shows that certain demographics are alienated as well, with some game elements like leaderboard showing a decrease in motivation, which is contrary to the supported norm that gamification increases it. In other studies, females were reported less motivated by gamification compared to their male counterparts, which raises the question again, to whom or to what gamification would work on? Most of the studies reporting inconclusive results regarding the question 3 show that we have passed the peak of inflated expectation and entered the throe of disillusionment. We are now seeing the realization that gamification is far off from what we expected it to be, showing positive results, but more research and experimentation is needed to polish it to the extent of being used and implemented. The goal to improve engagement and learning outcomes is possible. However, the current challenge is that we have no current standard and guidelines on how to use gamification in a coherent and effective or efficient manner. And with that, thank you very much for listening. Link to the paper is located in the description below and also attached to the discussion forum for ease of access. Again, this is Lucky Vengwa, and I wish you all a safe and healthy day. Thank you.